So we'll go ahead and get started. This is Saul Luckman, and you're listening to Saul Luckman Uncensored Conversations On. And I am really thrilled to have a new writer friend, Pranav from Polemos, who just came over to Substack on my invitation. So I get dibs on him. I found him. I really love finding people who are new to the app and maybe don't have the largest audience, but who are doing really great work. And I feel like it's a wonderful way of giving back to the community in terms of providing, other resources, other voices in this consciousness conversation that we're having. And Pranav really does an excellent job of contributing to that conversation. If you go over to his Substack, which I really hope you'll do, it's xpolemos.substack.com. And please give him a subscription and maybe pledge some support if he gets up and running with a paid model down the road. But you can read some of his articles that he was kind enough to post kind of in a hurry this week as we were prepping to have this conversation. There's The Hidden War They Don't Want You to See, A Wonderless Society, God's Business Model Suffering as Currency, and some other content there that's it's got a really good start. So very exciting to see all of that. And I wanted to read you a quote from one of his articles that maybe can help set the tone for this conversation. He writes that a hidden technology or superpower resides in all of us. It's scientifically proven and costs nothing. Many names have been used for it in the past, and some vary slightly in meaning. Precognition, telepathy, remote viewing, out-of-body experience, alchemy, telekinesis, magik with a K, astral travel, various non-intrusive healing modalities, and many more. Stories have been told of people like Edgar Cayce, Nostradamus, and yogis performing superhuman feats. But they also tell these stories as though nobody else can do these things, I suppose. Of course, there are certain limits we all have, but the very important thing to understand here is that being human is not just being flesh and bone. Our spirit has tremendous potential, and we forgot how to use it. And I want to give a big amen to that. Hey, Pranav, thank you for being here today. Really appreciate you joining me.
Thank you so much for this, Saul. It means a lot. As new writers, we know how hard it is to get people to read your stuff. So I really appreciate it. And thank you once again.
Yeah, well, it's really good. I didn't know. I mean, you contacted me on Instagram, and you were reading, I think you were already reading "Get Out of Here Alive." Is that true?
Yeah, I read it 6 months and I reread it last week again. But that's when I contacted you after I read it. Yes.
So you were really generous with a really nice Amazon review. Really appreciate that, certainly. And then you got into some of the other material. So we had a conversation about having a conversation about some of this work, and in relation to the work that you're doing. And I was happy to actually start reading it this week. So it's very good. You're a very talented writer, absolutely clear, and I like your take on some of this material, where you're questioning some of the more prosaic perspectives out there, as am I. And so I guess in that sense, if none other, we're certainly kindred spirits.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in a Hindu family and I'm out in India. So I see a lot of this stuff where it's fear mongering. And, it's funny because I can help you with all your troubles, but God needs your money. Okay, just help me, give me money, and I'll take care of your karma. And there's this entire system in India that operates as such. And I've been a part of this, and I've experienced this, and I want to speak out against this. And I know it exists in all religions. This kind of silliness. I try to add humor to these ideas because people, I guess, sometimes don't see it, but when you explain it in kind of humorous way, then they're like, "Oh my goodness, that does sound stupid. Why does this all-encompassing, all-powerful, omnipresent God need my $20 for to?" It's that silly to me, but it is what it is.
Yeah, you're right. I think this is what you're describing is a function of what I call the world cult. I wrote a book called The World Cult and You. It's a Substack exclusive, so it's not on Amazon. and I examine how religions and other pieces of the power structure keep people in check with these artificial demands, artificial structures, artificial rules. And I think in that book, I sort of equate sin and karma as being, just Eastern and Western sides of the same con game, really.
What do you make karma? Have you ever read Ian Stevenson's books? Remember Past Lives, where he
Yeah,
accounts 1,000 cases of children remembering their previous birth. Very, very accurate detail.
yeah, I've read his stuff is fascinating, and there I have a different take on reincarnation and what's going on with those types of past so-called past life memories. It doesn't mean that they're not happening, but I think they can be interpreted in a different manner from the way that Stevenson interprets them.
Hmm.
So, we can dive right in there, or we can go back to your question about epistemology and ontology, and how do we sort of navigate the truth or maze. Just how would you like to begin? I want to kind of hand this over to you as the director or space holder for this conversation, since that's what we agreed on. So you go wherever you want to go.
All right, sounds good. Why don't we start off with let's just start off with this karmic angle, I guess, because we're already on this topic, and eventually we can get down to maybe I am a truther, because I know you like to mock these truthers, but I'm always wondering what that means. But I think we can uh, segue into that a little later. I'm
Sure,
just
sure.
but yeah, so like I guess I've done a lot of research on karma, and obviously growing up in India, there's this a lot of this talk about karma. But as you said before, that a lot of it comes to back to shame and guilt before we were talking about, and how that is monetized and how that is fear mongering and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, interested to hear what do you think karma is? When Indian people see someone on the road who is debilitated, and they're missing limbs, they look like they're suffering tremendously, a lot of Indian people say, oh, that's their karma, they must have done something bad in their previous life, and therefore in this life they have to pay for it with whatever way they have to pay for it. And then it's funny because a lot of this paying for ends up being worshiping a certain god, or redemption, and all these kind of stuff. So I'm interested to hear what have you come across in terms of your karma research, and how do you understand karma in your way?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and it gets to the to the heart of a lot of this inner alchemy work that I've been doing and writing about, and an expanded and different understanding or understanding of what we're doing here. What is this place? Where do we come from? And to some extent, where and how do we go from here? So asking basic questions of mapping the coordinates of this experience. And what I've come to feel pretty strongly about, based on a kind of direct inner seeing and gnosis and feeling of energy and just feeling of rightness about information that I receive. You asked the question about how I process the information that's out there. The conclusion I've reached is that karma, as it's described, does not exist. That there are way too many. That's a very simplified way of describing a phenomenon that is not individual but collective. Meaning, when we come into this world, we are projected not as an individual but as part of a soul family, a soul group, a collective of people that with whom we share many, many traits. It's important to point out that when this happens, we don't necessarily come in at the same time. Therefore, we may be in a soul family with someone who died 100 years ago or 50 years ago. And when children are remembering their past lives, they are remembering someone with whom they have a very strong energetic resonance, who is part of their soul family. But it wasn't that child. That child is completely new. And I feel very strongly about this because it seems very obvious to me that we are in a kind of classroom here, a spiritual dojo of hard knocks. We're learning things here, and it's not always fun to do so, but that seems to be perhaps the primary purpose of this thing that we call reality. And if that's true, then what is the purpose? And my conclusion is the purpose is to create a soul. We are not a pre-existing soul. We come here to forge our soul in real time in this alchemical crucible. So if you read, for example, the work of John Keats, an English poet from the 19th century, he writes just absolutely beautifully about this phenomenon, and he lays out a kind of model for how the spirit, which he calls a kind of intelligence, comes into this world and is molded by it, but also kind of molds the world at the same time. I mean, it's certainly a two-way street as I understand it. So if we are not a pre-existing soul and we didn't have previous lifetimes per se, then we can't really have karma. What we can have is bleed throughs or empathy or sympathy with members of our collective that we may experience as memories or emotions or even ailments that we encode into our bodies, maybe epigenetically or intergenetically, through that resonance with someone who might have suffered or who might have had a certain concept of their identity that was limiting or perhaps liberating. On the other hand, you could receive benefits from your soul collective. The idea is that the oversoul behind this sub collective is experience is basically playing a gambling game at wanting to get it right. Somebody from this collective needs to make it, and making it is individuating, having a soul, and then getting out of the matrix, and like a seed going out into the dark sea of awareness to create another similar construct as a creator god. So if you only have one person at a time doing this, for every sort of personality configuration, you only have one chance of it happening. But if you can configure a group with 1,000 members or 100,000 members spread out over different times and different geographical areas, different conditions, then you greatly increase your chances of having at least one of those actually become another creator god and extend the fractal line of creativity.
Have you come across this video by Brett Stewart, the remote viewer, called Project Moksha on YouTube? He's a remote viewer who did this abstract target called Moksha, which is a Sanskrit word for liberation. I'm
Yes,
not
moksha. Yes, I'm familiar with that term. I don't know that video.
okay. So he had 5 remote viewers, remote view project, remote view Moksha. And I'm not sure if you know what remote viewing is, but it's you get a target, you're assigned a target, and they're double blind, and they take a one paper and sketch out what
Yes.
they. So it's very fascinating. I highly recommend people go check the video out because it's right in line with your work and what you talk about in your book. Describe these beings. It's kind of like the Bob Monroe Loosh Farm, and so just going off of what you said earlier, that forging, you said soul kind of thing. What he describes in the video is a lot of these entities sucking the energy out of the soul to fuel themselves and to get some kind of loosh energy, as Monroe would say. And
Yes. Yes.
he describes how these beings look. He describes the mechanical, futuristic machine that is sucking our energy away. And he describes all of these things. It's not him, it's a team of people. Again, they're all double blind, so they're blind to all of it. And it's pretty, he had to take the video down because he was getting a lot of comments about, fear mongering and such. But it's again, it's right in line with the stuff you talk about in Out of Here Alive. And as you mentioned, uh, get out into the eternal darkness like that. You said something like along the lines of that, and then go and become a creator god. So I guess my question is, you know, how do you differentiate the soul? Like, how do you, when you say for the soul, what do you think that process is like? And, what is it that this loosh energy sucking? Is it some kind of soul energy, you think, or is it, what is that energy what exactly is the thing?
Yeah, those are good questions. These are obviously, you know, difficult questions, and one engages to some extent in speculation. I try to combine the speculation that I give with some of my experiential based understanding of what's going on here. So what I've been able to see and feel is that we live in a little circumscribed bubble that we think of as reality, that's really just an assemblage point, just a possible reality. And we are conditioned through mimetic desire to believe that this is all that is, or this is the way all things are. And we don't realize that outside of this bubble is this vast, dark, what I call in the shamanic tradition, the dark sea of awareness that is full of life. It's full of other beings who aren't necessarily biological in the way that we understand the term, but they are natural beings. They're not even technological. It's not to say there could not be technological beings out there, because it's an infinity that we're talking about. But many of the beings, and some of the most advanced beings, are not technological in that sense. They're just really powerful mentally. So the being that I call the dragon, or sometimes the great parasite, which would equate to the demiurge or Lord Archon in Gnosticism, that is a very incredibly powerful mind flayer type of entity that has come here and has basically set up a loosh farm for the human population to mine our energy. It is mining the same energy that's used to create souls, but it's not necessarily mining the energy of souls, because most people here don't have souls yet. They're still trying to create them, but they get loosed by duality and politics and shame and guilt and false notions of karma and sin, the Catholic Church, taxes, etc., 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 and distracted and debilitated from their path of becoming the soul that they were meant to be. Meanwhile, there is some energy that they're producing, because as a human being, they are drawing in a certain amount of subtle energy, and that can be seen in remote viewing or astral projection or doing inner alchemy. You can actually see people's energy fields that you interact with in your memories or in other situations, and that energy can be and is harvested. We are meant to be kind of almost to have a kind of almost angelic presence of energy, almost like wings around the sides of us. It sort of parallels the toroidal energy that you hear about from the Institute of Heart Math and people who have studied the energy of the heart. But that energy is electromagnetic. I'm describing a subtle torsion, hyperdimensional, pranic type of energy. And that energy is supposed to be very large around us. It's essentially the signature of our consciousness. It's the aura, but it's being fed upon by the not only the great parasite or the dragon, but by its minions as well, many of whom would be classified as truthers in my book, people who basically are doing the same thing to their followers that the church is doing to many of its followers. They're basically looshing them of their time, attention, and energy and money. Right. So this energy that we're supposed to possess like great wings around us is fed upon until it's basically just this little glow around our ankles. And that's our energy that we barely subsist on. And it's why people get so sick. It's because they don't have enough energy. But they're not killed outright by the dragon. They're just kept as livestock and fed upon as needed.
Yeah, I remember Monroe said that this is a predator planet, and I was like, my goodness. I spent time at the Monroe Institute. One of the things that um, I don't know how you feel about this, but they don't like talking about the loosh energy and the loosh farm. because they say that it is negative. And my idea, well, you should tell people the truth and rise up to the occasion, because you can't let fear debilitate you. And there's a balance, right? There's fear mongering, and then there's this overly positive ideas like these hippie circles and stuff where you're not getting anywhere. And I think that is also a problem. So I guess
Mm-mm.
this is into my question for you is, how do you approach these things where, okay, no fear monger, at the same time, I don't want to make people delude themselves. And what value do you place on erudition? How do you approach epistemology? As you mentioned, the taxes, the suffering, the bills I got to pay, the kids, on and on and on. And I have a certain amount of time. Should I spend that time studying high energy physics, theoretical physics, Buddhism, Hinduism, a million other, occultism, alchemy, the shamanism? There's a million things to study. So how do you discern what's useful in the teleology of getting out of here? And how do you discern, okay, this is maybe just a waste of my time?
All right. So if you look at, God, this is a great question. I had a meme today, and I couldn't find it. I borrowed a meme online. I go around borrowing memes,
All right.
right? And it was basically like ascension, aliens, 5D, and all these other love and light concepts. And it had this face, looking at it almost like in a hypnotized, smiley way. And then the same person then was faced with the words, do the inner work, do the inner work, do the inner work, and their face was just as like almost blank.
Right.
So I like to think of the holy trinity of epistemology, ontology, and teleology. So when we talk about all this information, we're talking about epistemology, and there's only so far epistemology will take you because it's all mental.
Sorry to cut you off, but do you think that epistemology or that could be subjective, or is it objective truth?
I guess what I'm saying is that anything of a okay, from reading my material that one of the ideas that is essential to this body of work is the concept that the great parasite, the dragon, has given human beings its mind as their operating system. Therefore, when we think with our minds as intellectuals, as seemingly rational people, we are not using our own mind. We are thinking with a borrowed operating system that we don't have mastery of and that is designed to control and delude us. Therefore, epistemology is a dead end, always. So, if that's true, then how can we move forward? Well, the only way to move forward is to embrace ontology, which is being. And that's where we begin to encounter gnosis, which is the felt and experienced reality of our personal truth. When we begin to do that, then it's happening. GNO. You don't know KNOW that it's happening. You know GNO that it's happening. You feel it. You begin to embody it. And as you do that, and you do more and more of that, and you increase your energy one way or another, which is increasing your real consciousness, not the operating system's fake version of consciousness. As you do that, you begin to, voila, create your soul. Your soul begins to become embodied in you. It happens. You literally grow it inside of you, in every fiber of your being. When you've done enough of that, you are in a position to think teleologically, which is like, in my model, is how the hell do I get out of here now? Now that I've embodied in this place and I've sort of learned what this classroom has to teach me, and I want to move on, how do I do that? And that's where things like shamanism and inner alchemy play a very special role in my model, at least, in that they can help people conceptualize where we are and where we can go if we get out of here. And they also give people the tools to pursue that ultimate hero's journey, which I distinguish from the prosaic hero's journey, which is a circular going out, learning something, bringing some stuff back, giving it to the community, blah, 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 blah. It just goes in circles. That doesn't do anything radical. It might help some people, but ultimately, the most radical act is to get out of here alive. And I think that's something we can also talk about as being referenced and portrayed and theorized in all kinds of different traditions, whether we're talking the light body, the rainbow body, the body of bliss, and like Kriya Yoga, whatever tradition you want to look at, there is some version, igniting the fire from within in Toltec shamanism. There is some version, oh gosh, the whole physiology of light in Dokchen. Okay, so there is some variety wherever you look. Even in Christianity, my goodness, you have like the wedding garment is this whole thing that you put on. It's like this idea of it's connected in my mind to the idea of the uncorrupted flesh that you get when you go through some kind of beatification and deification. You actually become something much greater than yourself, and you become a kind of living saint. And sainthood is often associated with some kind of weird light body activation. It's all very strange. You also get very strange powers like siddhis that you have in the Eastern tradition, but you also have them in the Western tradition with somebody like Padre Pio literally flying alongside Allied pilots in World War II to warn them off from destroying a church where the German soldiers had already left. So it's like he flies and he bilocates and he's seen by multiple people doing this. So it's really kind of extraordinary to think about what can happen as one amasses this kind of personal power. We see this, of course, written about this type of thing written about copiously in Castaneda's works, which may or may not be fiction. We could talk about, is there any distinction between fiction and nonfiction? I think absolutely not in an imagined construct. But that's beautiful if you want to really get into this idea of how energy can take you to all of these miraculous places and invite your own miracles. Then just read Castaneda's books. They're extraordinary in that regard.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about, recapitulation, going back to shamanism. And I've read about 7 of his books, and I don't really recount him explicitly giving very detailed steps of how to do it. I remember one passage he was telling Carlos, look carefully. Yeah, they were sitting on a rock, and he's like, look carefully at every movement. And so I've done it briefly and periodically, recapitulate mostly the highly charged, energetic moments of my life, whether they were, prominent instances where it made me rethink things or whatever. But I wanted to know from you: do you have a particular system that do you like use a pen and paper? Do you sit down and look at it from different angles? Do you feel it? Do you feel a release? How do you approach this shamanistic recapitulation, and what are we supposed to focus on when we're doing this?
Yeah, great question. One thing I would like to point out is that I see recapitulation as a stepping stone to inner alchemy and doing energy reabsorption and energy projection as an inner alchemist. So, having said that, the way I learned to recapitulate was, as I described pretty much in Get Out of Here Alive, where you do the fan breath left and right, and you focus on a memory where there was an energetic charge, a trauma, a loss, something that happened that stuck with you, or that maybe you didn't know had stuck with you, and suddenly there it is in your memory. And then you can go back to that moment and breathe in the energy that you lost there. And if there were other people or situations or places that where you took energy that wasn't yours, you can give that back. And I like to see the energy coming back to me as being kind of technicolor, very much alive and present. And the energy that flows out of me that I'm giving back to the people it belongs to, I see that as black and white. It's just a helpful way of understanding that's not mine anymore. It's leaving me. It's no longer attached to me. We're separating it out. So I'm in color, that's in black and white, and I'm going to move forward. I began doing recapitulation. I mean, the first time I did it was quite some time ago. There's a great book called The Sorcerer's Crossing by Taisha Abelard, who was one of Castaneda's students, one of the quote unquote witches that you read about in his work, and she describes it. She sort of fictionalizes it and tells the story of her experience of recapitulating, and it's very very detailed. So I took a lot of pointers from that information. Old school recapitulation was taught to be performed in maybe a grave that you had made for yourself, or a cave, or some other very enclosed space. And the reason for that is that it's thought that that tightness helps consolidate your energy, and it creates more of a focal point to draw energy back into. And I think there may be some truth to that, but I was able to achieve a similar feeling and effect by just lying in bed with a eye mask on, with my covers on top of me, and sometimes I would put a pillow over me as well to give me some compression, and that gave me that sense of being focalized. I was a point of light, and I was bringing back in all of that energy. There's also something kind of embryonic. It's almost like you're in the womb and you're going through a rebirth when you have that feeling of closeness and compression. Someone was saying it really worked so well. Yeah, I agree. It can work really nicely, and the way I went about it in terms of what I chose to recapitulate was I've done it multiple ways. I've gone haphazardly to whatever seems to be presenting itself at the time. So whenever I do a session and I tune in, whatever is popping into my mind is what I recapitulate. I've also gone all the way through my life, starting even at my conception, and imagining that, of course, sort of remembering that using the imaginative faculty. And then I've just gone through everything I could possibly remember through every month and year of my life. And that took, gosh, at least 6 months to do.
How did you feel? Is there like a visible, not visible, but visible while you're doing this? Like you feel lighter? Do you feel more energized? Like you're consuming this energy, like you're reabsorbing this energy, right? From what I understand, when you talked about the colors, so I assume that it's a very energizing feeling you get after this.
It is. It also is typically very good for mental health, for mood, certainly energy levels, as you mentioned, but also, it can have positive effects on your relationships, and it can even affect other people who aren't the ones recapitulating, which is very bizarre. But you can observe that in real time. That's a pretty cool thing, and that's where you can begin to appreciate how our energy really is connected with other people. And that's the shamanic view. Certainly in Castaneda's work, for example, people are these globes of energy with all kinds of tendrils shooting off and protruding in all kinds of directions, and we interact with people as these energetic creatures that we are.
Yeah, that's. I think I wanted to ask you about this because slightly into the healing aspect, but I think you wrote in potentiate. It was you and your partner were out, I believe, in Costa Rica, and you see these orbs, I believe. And the reason why I bring this up is a couple weeks ago, my friend and I went to this place in it's like north of Bangkok called Kalkala, and it is high in UFO activity. So we go there and we just look up in the sky and we see a lot of these white streaks, white marks. Of course, I'm not a cosmologist, I'm not an astrophysicist, and I don't know exactly what I'm seeing. So I'm very skeptical always about everything when I look up. But it was very interesting what we were seeing. These white objects kind of just come, and we go back home, and my friend gets on a podcast, and he's talking to these two hosts, and notice orbs in the background, like these little tiny orbs in the background. And my friend sends me this video of it, and it looked just like the stuff we saw out in Kalkala, the same kind of streakish white streaks. And I think
Mhm.
right started to read your book, and I believe it was or it could have been conscious healing, where you talk about you and your partner going out and you seeing these orbs have this potential healing energy. So I wanted to know from you, like, what have you come across in your research, and more importantly, in your experience, that when you were out on the beach, I believe, and you and your partner were experiencing this orb, energy, and can you like give us some kind of palpable visualization of what was going on there and how it transpired later on from whatever you experienced?
Yeah, that was in Potentiate Your DNA. And I was describing the time when the potentiation vowel codes were given to us, basically. And that allowed me to heal myself with potentiation and later regenetics. So we went to a beach. We were down in Buzios in Brazil, and that was very close to an area that Ivan Sanderson had identified as one of the 12 devil's graveyards on the globe, where there's a lot of weird paranormal activity and UFO sightings and disappearances of planes and ships and that kind of thing. So it was very odd that we were so close to that area. It's actually why we had gone there, because we were theorizing that maybe the veil between worlds was kind of thin there, and we might get more information for our healing purposes, because I was on a mission to heal myself because I was dying. I had an autoimmune illness. During that experience, when we went out to the beach at night and these glowing uh, orbs showed up over the water, we were very surprised in a way to see that. There was also maybe an inner calm, or maybe almost a sense of I was expecting this, so, or I knew what was going to happen. It's very strange. I wasn't. We neither of us was freaked out, but we were aware that something uncanny was going on, and then those balls of light then came into our bodies. They approached over the water, and then they kind of popped into our bodies, and there was almost a kind of sizzle and pop, almost an audible thing that happened, and then the lights went out, and we were in darkness. And that was that. We didn't even. I don't think we even talked. We just walked home and went to sleep. Um, I can't remember exactly how I described that in the book. In any case, we certainly got in bed, eventually went to sleep, and then we were visited with these vowel codes in our dreams. We woke up with these vowel combinations of the English vowels, and we realized we were being given the codes that we were to sing and think simultaneously to do this first DNA activation that ended up getting me well. It was what cured me.
What do you so this is brings you along the lines of astrology and stuff like that, and we hear, from the works of people like John Pope, you hear these terrestrial, you hear things manifesting from soft objects into hard objects, and there's a lot of debate and talk things. And from what I understand from your experiences, it's a very positive experience, of course. And you hear the other side of things, where there's abductions, there's fear, there's all of that going on. So, do you see this kind of spiritual war going on in some sense, where it's taking place on a level where there are the positive light beings? What do you make of the orbs in a sense? Do you have some kind of idea there? What energy it's from, who they are. The other aspect is, these are they related to the others, the gray aliens we see, the Nordics, and the other stuff that's going on in the stuff? So, do you have any kind of idea, or you just kind of leave it as it?
You know, this is where you get into the truthing phenomenon and all of the rabbit holes associated with that. Uh, you know, my my sincere gut feeling is that most of the information out there about aliens and extraterrestrials that we are given to believe is true and that we consume and that people talk about is purely hallucination. It's manufactured content. It's designed to freak people out and lose people and separate them and create warring camps and this idea of a spiritual war that is something that we would understand from our 3D perspective. I'm here to say if there is such a spiritual war going on, it's happening in a very different way because of the level of the beings involved. The way they would process would be much higher levels of chess.
Mm.
But one of the things that would be very important in any spiritual war would be the attention of people, how to take people's attention and steer it in a certain direction. Because the strange thing about being people is that we have this capacity of the imagination, which is basically the attention applied creatively. So our attention. Then we use that attention, begin to believe in something, we apply that energy, and then lo and behold, that thing begins to come to pass. We do this individually all the time in our private lives. It's been done with egregores and tulpas and other phenomena where people have actually created servitors or other, beings to do their work or to be a guide, and then other people have been able to even see these mental fabrications. And then on a collective level, it's how society is created and held in place. And it is the very walls of the prison that we live in when you talk about the prison. This is because we are using an operating system that isn't our own, thinking that we are creating outside of that operating system, or just simply not realizing that it exists. And the dragon is able to co-opt our attention and create our world with it, our our farm, our loosh farm with it. The funny thing is that that being, that dragon, this whatever it really is so powerful, and yet it can't create. Or at least it can't create on our behalf. It can't create the prison. We have to create it. This is why contracts and all of these agreements and all of this, all this stuff that a lot of sovereignty people get into. That's why it's ubiquitous, and it is almost like signing a pact with the devil on one level or another. It has to be done. It seems to be like a universal law, or this creature simply cannot create on its own, and it has to parasitize people's ability to create.
Yeah, you hear these stories of when these near death experiences where people are up there and they have to be so strict. Like they have to say yes, they have to accept some way. And it's kind of like that weirdness of, well, if you're so powerful, why do you have to get us to accept? And like you said, it's you're creating your own mental prison, which is very fascinating. And yeah, I wanted to segue into some of the healing aspects and something that you mentioned in your book. And nature and nurture are part of consciousness, is something you said. And you talk about genetics, you talk about epigenetics, and you talk about something very new for me, metagenetics. And I'm wondering if you've read a book called Determined by Dr. Robert Sapolsky, where he pretty much uses genetics, epigenetics to come to the conclusion that we don't have any free will and that everything is determined. Now you bring in the third aspect of metagenetics. And is metagenetics more fundamental than epigenetics genetics in the sense that I understand that there's a limit on how much we can change things. I can't go from 6 feet tall to 7 feet tall, changing my genetic structure. And there's certain things that you cannot change. But in terms of healing, put aside the other stuff, but in terms of healing and also in terms of free will versus determinism, how much does metagenetics play a role in our ability to heal ourselves from various different diseases, or are certain things more deterministic? What do you how do you gauge that of determinism versus free will, and where does metagenetics fit into the
Well, first of all, my my understanding is that free will is the baseline of the entire realm of infinity. It is all based in free will, that there is no such thing as predetermination, period. And that's just an illusion. That's one of the dragon's tricks, basically. That all is free will, all is choice, and that choices create worlds. And until we learn that, we can't really be responsible for the things that we create in the way that we need to be if we're going to go out there and create entire massive constructs one of these days. In terms of epigenetics versus metagenetics, I love Larry Dossey's framework, and I co-opted that to have that conversation and potentiate your DNA. His idea of the three eras of medicine, era number one being the genetic era, basically the kind of mechanistic idea of medicine, the body is a machine, that sort of thing. And then era two was the mind body era of medicine, where we realized that our minds could affect our bodies. And that would be the epigenetic moment tied to that era. And we are in the process, according to Dawsey and according to me, we are in the process of moving into an era three, which is non-local. And that would be the metagenetic era, where we're actually communicating with the source field, with the dark sea of awareness, with the totality of ourselves, with our unconscious reservoir of power.
So when you're tapping into this, as you mentioned, FB, what aspect? What do you think the tool you're using in terms of the inner tool that you're using to tap into this? Is there a focal point in your body that you use to channel this energy to heal yourself, or how in your idea?
In terms of, it depends on what modality you're using. Obviously, if you're doing regenetics and you're using sound and thought to heal, you're doing one thing. If you're gathering energy, let's say you've uh, begun experimenting with inner alchemy and you're pooling in energy into your body, you're learning how to breathe that in. That actually does enter you through your shoulder blades. Sort of, there's like almost like a valve between your shoulder blades, and then that energy will go down into your stomach, and then the stomach will digest the energy. And from there, you can pull it down into your dantian area in men, area kind of behind the navel, or in women, it's the womb. And that's where you store this energy. And if you can pack that enough over time, it can begin to transform into what's been called the philosopher's stone. And that is the power pack, the energy pack that can allow you to do very miraculous things here in the matrix. Or if you conserve it, it can be the jet pack that helps you get out of here alive and sail off through eternity to have adventures and become a dreaming god perhaps one of these days. Now, at the same time, I would say whatever you're doing, you're using some aspect of your attention and imagination to accomplish it. So always, that is the foundational thing that you're doing, is you are choosing to believe in something. The shamanic term is called controlled folly. You know that you're just believing in it. You know that there's no there. You know that epistemology is just smoke and mirrors. But that perhaps somewhere under all of that, there is ontology, something real that you can believe in long enough to make it happen or to allow it to happen. And that's the kind of crazy magic that one has to get into. That's the mindset when you over intellectualize things, not you personally, but when people do, then you get in your own way and you stop the flow of energy and the flow of your imagination and its ability to bring about what you're trying to imagine.
I wanted to ask you about humor. A lot of your work is you're bringing in a lot of humor, and also how this relates to the trickster archetype, and if you have any opinions on that. But I think what we sometimes lose when we get serious in these endeavors is we lose that aspect of humor. And I think it's so important to have that, the vibrations you have when you're laughing and you're releasing all that tension. I think it's so lost. And I'm really admire your ability to bring that out in your work. And so I was wondering what, in terms of the trickster archetype and how that manifests, what do you make of humor? What exactly is you, if you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about that again today as I was doing some projects having to do with the Angel's Dictionary, which is this satirical lexicon that I wrote a few years ago. And the question is, what is satire in that book really? And can satire do anything good for anyone? Can it be effective? You had two opposite camps during the golden age of satire in English literature, for example. You had Henry Fielding, this novelist who wrote Tom Jones and some other material, and he thought of satire as almost like it was sort of a doctor or a healer that could help people heal their wounds by laughing at them, essentially, and learning to laugh at themselves. And then you had, on the opposite spectrum, you had Jonathan Swift, who wrote Gulliver's Travels, saying, I am a satirist. Yes, I write this, but ultimately, satire is a glass wherein viewers do see everyone else's face but their own. So people can't even recognize it when they're being satirized. It's completely useless, and it's basically more about me just getting this off my chest, and I'm creating a record of all this folly that I'm witnessing. So I don't know for sure if either camp is right, but those are two perspectives on satire that you could extend to just humor in general. I know humor makes me feel better. I think there's the ability to laugh at what people are doing without necessarily laughing at the people themselves. And this gets into perhaps a conversation about how to be a humorist and to laugh at certain things without engaging in shaming, because we live in this huge shame culture, and shame is a true weapon of the dragon to separate and limit us. So how can we be humorists without being shamers? That's a really, really big question. And I think keeping it light and being willing to be sort of self-deprecating at times in a humorous way is a way of keeping the playing field kind of even, and not positioning yourself as high and mighty versus everyone else that you're engaging with. So for me, for example, in Musings from a Small Island, which is this memoir that I wrote a few years ago, and it's very humorous, you know, I'm just as screwed up as everyone that I'm calling screwed up, and that's pretty obvious, and I'm pretty honest about that. And so I'm out there just control volleying my way through the world as best I can.
Do you think it's funny because it's like laughing at yourself is almost like laughing at your false self, right? Like at that dragon self in a sense. Maybe.
Yeah, it's I like to call it watching the movie. You're watching this funny movie of yourself, and you're realizing that you're just playing a role, and you can have a laugh at it. And when you can do that, that's very freeing. And yes, it opens up a lot of creative possibilities because you don't get bogged down in your story.
Mhm.
Once your story gets rigid and very codified, then it's hard to change it. This is why this whole identity movement that we see in the world, people so obsessed with their sexual and gender identity. Not that I don't want people to know themselves, but if they define themselves like that and they completely, for the most part, ignore their spiritual nature, for example, ignore any conversation about the soul or soul making or anything like that, and they're just completely focused on their sexual identity, then they're creating a box for their lives.
Yeah, I think it's just it was just change of focus, right? And a lot of this, I think humor aspect is also releasing a lot of that negative tension in you. It just, like you said, it just feels good sometimes. And dance and song, I think when we lose, we become very serious and fixated in things. So yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's funny, as I look around, and I wrote this article recently about one, and Martin Heidegger used to call it dwelling, and how we dwelling as society, and it's kind of like this sterility. And as I said, the dragon cannot create, so everything starts is going to start seeming like a replica. It's the same and the same, and there's no more creativity. And I wanted to get your thoughts on this, since you're a writer. In the age of writing and AI now, what do you make of it as a writer? It's one of those things where a lot of people are afraid, fear of, like, okay, that's gonna just take over. But I think that you can never replace creativity. How can you? You can't just copy someone, because people will tell. So what are your thoughts on all of this in terms of writing? AI in writing.
Well, for me, it AI in relation to writing or other things for that matter is not something to be feared in the way most people fear it. And I understand that people are afraid of losing their jobs, their source of income. They had this whole education that suddenly seems as if it was for nothing. I get all of those feelings. I'm not blind to that, but at the same time, I see I see the AI phenomenon as part of a kind of techno transhumanist agenda. Yes, and we could talk about some of the darker aspects, but from a different perspective, it's part of the spiritual dojo that's pushing us to bring out more creativity, more imagination, to become more powerful creators, to go so fast with our creativity, so fast and far that AI could never catch up, not in a million years, because we are that powerful. And it will always be copying us. It can only copy. There is no artificial general intelligence that's going to become like a person. This is a fantasy. It's an absolute fantasy. But it'll get really good at passing itself off as a kind of generalized intelligence. And people will believe it and they will worship it.
I think that's going back to this religious dogma again, right? What do you worship? Just go from one thing to another thing, and I think this is where your power is so key. When especially when you read things like the shamanistic traditions, how I want to learn more about it too. I have a little bit of Castaneda's work and some of ayahuasca. So I want to ask you about that question in terms of, you think psychedelics play a role in your work? Do you use them at all? How do you approach psychedelics?
Okay, I've done them. I've done high dose psychedelics. I've done microdosing. I haven't done any of that in a number of years at this point, and I don't plan to moving forward because I found that you really don't need it. You can do what a lot of people call astral projection, which is basically dreaming awake using inner alchemy and have some of the most vivid, trippy experiences you can imagine. Just by lying down on your bed and going into your consciousness. And you can actually end up putting yourself in a state where you are effectively dreaming, but you can have your eyes open.
I've had a very similar conclusion to that too, because I think I've done it too much, and I think it plays a negative effect after a while, because it's a very heavy strain on your nervous system at a certain point, and I think it can, it's overwhelming, and you're only going to get as much as the work you put in outside of it. And so I think there's this idea that it's going to do some magic to you, and I think that's just a false narrative at times. And it's only when I think it calls you at certain times in your life, but other than that, I think the work should be done when you're fully, aware of things. I think that's what I was trying to break through, of these liminality states, in terms of understanding madness, and then understanding, like you said, the truther thing. I think you can go down this rabbit hole, and you can get lost in it a lot of times, of this. Okay. And then you come back out and you're like, what was that? What was the point of all that? That was for nothing, and you get nowhere. So, for me, a question for you is, in terms of getting out here alive, do you see it as this sort of linear progression when you're embarking on this journey, or do you see it something? Because I know you said that this cyclicalness is a trap, right? That's the trap, and so how do you substantiate the getting out of here? Like, what is the progression of this? Can you gauge the progress in your own life in any way, or is it something completely illogical in every capacity? And how do you understand that?
Yeah, I think it's both and. To be honest, part of the whole controlled folly is a both and scenario where it is both logical and illogical at the same time. I call it the profoundly absurd or the absurdly profound. And that's just to me a very important dynamic at the heart of all of this. And when we try to think about reality using only, let's say, the quote unquote left brain approach, that's only one side of things. But the right brain is also only one side of things. It's both at the same time. And I think that's hard for a lot of people to understand or understand. And it's interesting how left brain and right brain people, it's almost like left and right in politics, or this religion versus that religion. It's another way of dividing people when we should be taught to be whole and to use all of our brain, whatever that means, and whatever the brain is, and whatever it does. We could have lots of conversations about the brain as an antenna or receiver or that kind of thing. But in any case, you asked a really, really good question about how to monitor your progress and even know if you're making any progress and what you might feel on that journey. So the first goal, as I mentioned earlier, is to create that philosopher's stone in your body and to begin energizing it enough so that you can feel it to some degree, and you can really visualize it when you go into to pack the energy into it. It's kind of there. You're almost like in a room, and if you're a man, you're in a room and you're Dantian, and you can envision your dream body as the thing that's packing it, and you can literally just pick up, you know, handfuls of golden energy that you've taken, that has been purified from your stomach, that's been taken down into that area, and you can slap them on like mortar, and then you can literally pound it in. You can just imagine yourself doing this. You can imagine your perfect dream body doing that. Imagine your most vital, robust, muscular, perfect self doing this in the, uh, doing this packing. And after you've done this for quite a long time, we're talking months, maybe even years, you might begin to feel this energy in your solar plexus area. And then you might actually begin to get clues for how you personally can borrow from it a little bit at a time and do things with it. Like it's a fast track. If I'm right, and when you're doing a creative act, you're basically using the same energy, it's just not been packed this way. That means you have a highly concentrated reservoir of this energy that you could use to perform a miracle very quickly, and you could test it like that. Just manifest something. Don't don't agonize over it, and just make it happen. And as soon as you begin to be able to do that, obviously there will be a tendency to say, "Oh, I could change the world, or I could get rich, or I could do this, or I could time travel." But the point of getting out of here alive is not to do any of those things. It's to be able to do those things, but to not utilize that energy, because you're going to need it. You're going to need it. The dark sea of awareness is big and wild, and you're going to need it. So that's one way of testing your progress. You can also, as time goes by, learn how to use some of that energy in going through what Castaneda called the dreaming gates. Don Juan called them. There are these 7 gates of dreaming, and there's a whole protocol for going through them. John Kreider, who's an amazing writer on inner alchemy, he calls them the rooms of the projectionist. I like to call them mental chambers, so people have their own nomenclature. But basically, you go into, let's say, your first room where you imagine yourself in a kind of 3D space, and then you look for a portal out of that room that will present itself to you in different ways. Different people will have different experiences. For some people, the portal might be an object, like a port key in Harry Potter. Or for me, it's actually an intense purple light that begins to shine in an area of the room, and I know that that's my portal. And then you can walk or fly or otherwise move through that portal into another space, which might be a room, it might be a landscape, it might be a cave, it might be a mountaintop, or you might find yourself in a bar somewhere. Anything could happen, and that's your second room. And then you learn to navigate in that second room until you find another portal, and you basically progress through these rooms until you can get to the fifth, sixth, and seventh rooms. And those are very, very intense. And they have to do with really pulling in all of your totality and your immortal essence, which is the phoenix, and learning how to be all of that at one time. And that's when you're, a hair's breadth away from becoming that dreaming god. If you can pull that off, you have made it, and you can actually go on and create your own construct.
Fascinating. That's very fascinating. I had a question about, in terms of your partner played a huge role in a lot of your development, from what I understand, and not just because she has a background in nutrition, but what do you think? What do you make of, this whole journey? Do you think that having a partner in that sense is just going to accelerate your growth way faster than if you do this solo? Obviously, not in the obvious sense of like the material things like information and stuff, but more so in I guess you could say spiritual sense, where you have polarity, and maybe that polarity is creating something really strong, and you both are harnessing this sort of energy. Do you think that it's a much faster growth when you have a partner to embark on this journey?
Yeah, I know that, like in your most recent article, or one of your recent articles on Wonderless Society, you get into the feminine and masculine archetypes and the energy of the libido, and how we might be in relationship. And I found that really fascinating. I would recommend people go check out that article. Um, and my answer to your question is that it completely depends. You could have a situation where your partner drags you down and keeps you from actually getting out of here alive, and you might have a situation where you push each other and help each other. You might learn how to actually dream together. That some people do that, and shamans have done that. That's a possibility for people who are very dedicated. If they do this together, they can actually rendezvous in their dreams, in their projections, and they can like mutually verify, as in remote viewing, that this is happening. That's a fascinating kind of double blind study you could do for yourself.
Yeah, I think that's I think like because in the tantric literature, it's always harnessing that energy and cultivating it. As you mentioned, it's very fascinating. So what you were saying is very similar to a lot of the yogic teachings. Like these cities, these powers are distractions in a sense, but you should harness that energy to utilize it. I believe it was either Patanjali or someone else who mentions this, and I
I
think
think it was, yes.
yes, yeah, and it's very because again, it's going back to this like for tantra in India, people will look at you like you're a crazy person because of all the people are very materialistic minded, right? They go to a tantric person and they want money, they want power, they want relation, they want all those kind of things, and they give it a bad rap. And I think when your teleology is on getting out of here alive, all that changes to your focus is now on different aspects of raising that energy for something else. And I think you don't sign that contract of I will sell my soul to the devil, so to say. And I think a lot of people do that unconsciously or maybe even consciously. And so, yeah, I think perhaps the last question, and maybe it's a little bit of a humorous one, is how do you identify, the normie from someone who's on this path? And obviously, there are very easy ways to do that. But as you mentioned in the beginning of this conversation, that we're forging our soul in a way. So, is there a way to, we talk about as such are the ones that have cultivated this soul. And when you see a normie like a blank zombie look in their face, which is why I love these communities, man, because you meet so many people who are, they're awake in a sense. They're just like they're asking questions and they're engaging and they're coming to this with love and compassion. And so, in a back to a little bit of the humor, is is our job, is your job to just poke humor at this whole thing and just kind of like, hey guys, what are you doing, kind of thing, or is it just to focus on your own path and grow that way? What do you make of this whole madness? Let's say.
I really think that the ultimate way to be as you advance on this path, and this is something that in the beginning may be really hard to even conceptualize, then my experience has been that I can sometimes tap into it, and then maybe that gets a little more consistent until you can kind of be it. And that is to really have not not love as it's typically understood, but agape, where you can just radiate love for all beings, including yourself, and not try to change any of them in any way whatsoever, because you are accepting them for exactly how they are, even people doing bad things. When that happens, the irony, of course, is that you will change the world around you all the time just by your being.
It's just sort of.
I love this quote by Charles Bukowski in terms of identifying, who some of these souls are. He says that the free soul is rare, but you know it when you see it, basically because you feel good, very good, when you are near or with them.
Mhm. Are you kind of Nietzsche-esque in this matter? Like you don't look at morality and ethics in that same way as like good and evil. You're just more so that it's the wrong focus. Is that
Yeah,
kind of your?
very much so. I have a blog and a video, and I think this is part of. I think this was in the World Cult and You, where I wrote about this also. So maybe I pulled that out of the World Cult and You. I think I did. And basically, I'm arguing that evil is just a psyop, and you could also
Mhm.
say that good is just a psyop. That we are both. There's the whole Jungian concept of embracing one's shadow, and until you do that, you're just going to project onto others, whatever you haven't resolved in yourself. I mean, recently, for example, I posted on my notes on Substack a little realization that I had just riding around the neighborhood, where you get to see these little signs that people have put up. And they basically have put up signs saying that hate has no home here, right? And it's a political statement. It has to do with the left and right divide. And I basically said that was code for I haven't integrated my shadow, and therefore I project my shadow onto other people from the comfort of my home.
Yeah, I'm so big on the Jungian shadow work. I think it's very underutilized, and unfortunately, we live in a my dad's a psychiatrist, and there's an element of prescribing pills, which is a whole new thing. And by the way, I love your argument against vaccination because one of my family members recently had to go through surgery from these recent vaccinations. She had the ovarian.
Let's call them Jack scenes, like in my novel Cali the Destroyer, so that
Okay,
YouTube doesn't nail us.
apologize. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one thing I really loved about. I think it was Potentiate, where you go into such depth about the vaccination. Sorry, the vaccination, and I recently, yeah, it's just been one of those things where it pisses me off because it affected someone in my family. But yeah, it is part of this system that we have to stay aware of, and you know, and I think I believe you have a child as well. So I think this is something that people that need to know about this needs to be educated on the very basics of it. And you bring up Jonas Salek, I believe is his name, who testified about it, and then people still don't know about it. So it's very fascinating to me how people remain with their ears closed to certain things. But I really enjoy your research you've done on this. You've gone so deep on those books in terms of biology and physics and healing. I can't imagine the amount of hours you spend researching those. So it really was fascinating for me to read, and I highly recommend anyone listening read Potentiate and Consciousness Healing, Conscious Healing, I believe, and obviously Get Out of Here Alive, as you bring in the healing aspect and then you bring in the philosophical aspect and you tie them all in together in a wonderful way. So it was very enjoyable for me to read all of them, and it really was close to my story in terms of healing and their diet. You know, my diet was very similar: raw meat and vegetables for a long
Oh,
time,
wow.
dealing those issues. And yeah, that's why I resonated with your books. It was very similar journey, and I know people there. I have people that are close to me that are still suffering in on this. Just trying to, chronic fatigue, illnesses that they can't explain. Doctors are not helping. I have a family full of doctors, but the way they're trained is in a very different way, and so that's why I really love your work. It's really impacting people, I feel, and I'm curious to dive in deeper. I haven't seen a lot of your stuff on Substack as it's new for me, but I'm very interested in learning more about it.
Man, that I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. That means a lot. You're so bright and very just deep in your way of looking at things. So for you to say that is really very humbling. So I appreciate that.
Of course, man. And thank you once again for having this conversation. It's very enjoyable, these conversations for me, because I'm someone that always tries to say I don't know everything, and I'm very humble in that aspect because I don't care so much of what people think. I just want to learn and I want to grow and I want to heal. And you've done a lot of that, and you teach a lot of that, and you talk a lot about that. So this was very enjoyable for me, and I would love to do this again too if you want to.
Yeah, let's do it. I know that I think we've kind of run over time here. We were going to do some questions, but I think maybe we've gone on long enough. I don't want to keep people on for so long, but maybe we can do a round two down the road. Maybe if you write some more stuff, I'll read your stuff, and maybe you can take on another one of my books, and we can talk about that. There's a sequel or a prequel, depending on how you want to look at it, to Get Out of Here Alive. It's an exclusive on my Substack. It's called Out Through the Indoor,
Okay.
and that's really another piece of this puzzle that I've been putting together, so people can check that out. And The World, Cult, and You is also a Substack exclusive. That's an audiobook and an ebook. So go to saulluckman.substack.com. Just check all that out. You can look at my all of my premium content. I really have a bunch of stuff. There's so much. I've been going back through it, resharing some of my older content, and I'll never get through it all. It's just
Wow.
like Borges's library of stuff. I mean, there's just endless labyrinthine, things to get into there. So hopefully I'm not creating my own truth or rabbit holes too much in my own process here. I also want to remind people to go check out Pranav's world at Polemos. It's xpolemos.substack.com. Please give him a subscription, give him some support, say hi, share his stuff, and you can help both of us out by sharing this interview and liking it. If you've liked it, please give us some love. That really helps people tune into this when it's posted. The recording will be posted sometime this evening, hopefully, and then that can be shared. So if you want to share that with your folks on the timeline, that would be really awesome, and I would appreciate that greatly. So, Pranav, this was fun. Let's do it again.
Hey, so always my pleasure, and I'm looking forward to more of your work, man. I love it all. I love the humor. I love your writing, and it inspires me, in my writing. So, looking forward to it, man.
Yeah, let's do it. And thanks to everybody out there who spent time with us this evening. I hope this was meaningful to you in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All
Thank you,
right.
guys.
Cheers.
Peace. See you.